The envelope was white. That was the first thing Lucy noticed. Crisp white, unsealed at the corner like he hadn't even bothered to press it shut all the way. She had been standing at her mother's grave for 11 minutes. She knew because she'd been counting. 11 minutes since the last shovelful of dirt. 11 minutes since the pastor said amen, and the small group of people who loved her mother began drifting away. Cole appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision. She thought for 1/2 second that he had come to stand beside her. He held out the envelope instead. "The lawyers said sooner is better," he said. Lucy looked at the envelope, looked at the grave, looked at the man she had called her husband for 5 years. She took it, slid it into her coat pocket, turned back to face the headstone. Cole left. She stayed. She didn't cry. She had already cried everything out that morning for her mother. She had nothing left for him. Before we continue, if this story is already hitting somewhere deep, drop your country and the time where you are in the comments. I want to know who's watching. Now let's go back, because to understand what Cole Whitfield just did, you need to understand exactly what he didn't know. The night Lucy Mills wrote the first line of code for Meridian Nexus, Cole was asleep on the couch with the television still on. She remembered the exact sound of it, the low murmur of some late-night sports recap bleeding through the wall, the occasional burst of crowd noise, the way the blue light from the screen crept under the door of the small room she had converted into a workspace. She sat at her desk in an oversized university sweatshirt, her hair loose, her feet cold because she kept forgetting to put on socks, and she worked. She worked the way she had always worked, quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone to witness it. That was March of 2018. She had an idea that had been living in her chest for almost 2 years by then, a logistics technology platform, not the flashy kind that got splashed across magazine covers, but the kind that actually solved something, the invisible hemorrhage of money and time that happened every single day inside mid-sized supply chains. The inefficiencies nobody talked about because they were too unglamorous to pitch at a conference. Lucy had seen it up close during 4 years as an operations analyst. She had mapped it, modeled it, lost sleep over it. And then she had done something about it. Marcus Webb had believed her before anyone else did. He was 12 years older, 2 decades deeper into the industry, and he had looked at her 37-page proposal across a coffee shop table and said without any fanfare, "This works. Let's build it." They structured the company quietly. Lucy took 51% her idea, her architecture, her intellectual property registered under her name on the 14th of March, 2018. Marcus took 49. They agreed he would be the public face in the early years, not because Lucy lacked confidence, but because they were both pragmatic people who understood that certain rooms opened faster for certain faces, and they were not above using that truth to their advantage. Lucy would be listed as a co-founder in every internal document, every shareholder agreement, every contract. She simply would not be the name on the press release. She told Cole about it once. Early on, he had been standing in the kitchen doorway eating cereal from the box, looking at her the way he sometimes looked at things he found mildly puzzling, but not interesting enough to investigate further. "It's a tech startup," he said. "Logistics technology," she said. "Supply chain optimization." He nodded slowly. "So, like software?" "Essentially, yes." He shook the cereal box, once looked inside. It shook it again. "Cool. How long is that going to take?" She had looked at him for a moment. "As long as it takes." "Okay." He pushed off the doorframe. "Don't stay up too late." That was the longest conversation they ever had about Meridian Nexus. After that, he called it her project. Then when months became a year and a year became 2, he started calling it her little project, with a particular emphasis on the word little that Lucy chose deliberately and consistently not to respond to. Bo Diane was worse. Cole's mother had a talent for packaging condescension inside the syntax of concern. "Cole says you spend all your evenings on that computer. A woman should be present in her home, Lucy. Present for her husband. I've been hearing about this business idea for years now, sweetheart. At some point, you have to ask yourself if it's going anywhere. A woman who knows her place doesn't need a seat at the table." That last one she had said at Easter dinner 2021, while passing the bread rolls and not looking at anyone in particular. Lucy had reached across the table, taken a roll, buttered it slowly, and said nothing. Cole had laughed the short, reflexive laugh of a man who wanted to move past an awkward moment without addressing it. Lucy had filed that moment away. She filed everything away. By 2022, Meridian Nexus had contracts with 11 regional distributors. By 2023, they had expanded to 3 continents. By early this year, acquisition offers had been circling for 18 months, and the one that finally came in clean, fully funded, legally airtight was worth $750 million. Patricia Wells had been beside Lucy through every step of the negotiation. Patricia, who had known Lucy's mother for 20 years. Patricia, who had drafted the prenuptial agreement in 2019 before the wedding the document Cole had signed, without reading carefully because he had been confident there was nothing significant to protect against. The closing documents were signed at 9:47 in the morning. Lucy's mother died at 2:15 that afternoon. She had gotten the call while still in the car, leaving the attorney's office, the ink barely dry on the most significant transaction of her professional life, and she had sat very still in the backseat for a long time, with her phone pressed against her chest, not crying, yet just absorbing. The way you absorb a shock before your body knows what to do with it. She went straight to the hospital. She sat with her mother for the last 40 minutes. She held her hand. The next morning was the funeral, and Cole had been there in his good black suit, shaking hands with people he barely knew, accepting condolences for a woman he had never truly made an effort to love. Lucy had watched him from across the room and felt something she couldn't name precisely. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. Something that had been accumulating for years in a room he never thought to enter. He didn't know about the deal. She hadn't told him. Not because she was hiding it, but because somewhere along the way, his opinion had simply stopped mattering enough to volunteer. The envelope he handed her at the graveside was cold. She could still feel the shape of it through her coat pocket, as she stood there after he left the winter air, pressing in around the edges of her collar, the dirt on her mother's grave still dark and fresh. He called it a hobby. He had been calling it a hobby for 6 years. And in 9 weeks in a courtroom, someone would read that number out loud, $750 million, and the air would go out of the room. But that morning, standing at the grave, Lucy just breathed. In, out, in, out. She had time. The boxes appeared on a Tuesday. Not moving boxes, not the kind stacked in towers that announce a departure. These were smaller, decorative. The kind of boxes a woman brings when she is not moving in, so much as settling in a candle here. A framed photo there, a silk throw folded over the arm of a couch that had been Lucy's couch for 4 years. Lucy came home from her mother's house that afternoon to find Vanessa Osei standing in the living room, holding a glass of Lucy's wine, studying the wall above the fireplace with the focused expression of a person who was already mentally redecorating. Cole was beside her. He didn't flinch when Lucy walked in. That was the part that stayed with her afterward, not the presence of the other woman, not the wine, not the boxes. The absence of flinching. He had moved past the stage of pretending entirely, and he had done it so smoothly that Lucy understood it had not been a decision so much as a arrival. He had simply become who he was always going to become, and he no longer saw any reason to manage her feelings about it. Vanessa's going to be staying here for a while, he said. The tone was the tone of a man announcing a schedule change. Mild, logistical. Vanessa turned from the wall and looked at Lucy with the particular expression of a woman who has already had a conversation about you and feels she knows the shape of you. A small smile, curious. Not unkind exactly, but not cautious either. The smile of someone who has been told there is no resistance to expect. It's a beautiful home, Vanessa said. Lucy set her keys on the table by the door. Yes, she said, it is. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, stood at the counter and drank it slowly. Through the archway she could hear Cole saying something low and Vanessa laughing the easy laugh of someone who feels safe. Lucy rinsed the glass, set it upside down on the drying rack, went to her room, closed the door. Diane Whitfield arrived the following evening with a covered dish and an agenda. She set the dish on the dining room table without being invited to lifted the lid to release a cloud of steam, and then seated herself at the head of the table, Lucy's chair technically, but Diane had always treated it as a formality and looked across at Lucy with the expression she reserved for conversation she had already concluded. I think it would be easier for everyone, she said, if we talked about a timeline. Lucy looked at her. A timeline for what? For the transition. Diane unfolded her napkin. Cole has been generous about this. I think you'll agree. He's not asking you to leave immediately, but it would help to know within the month. 6 weeks. The room was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. I haven't agreed to any timeline, Lucy said. Diane's eyes moved to her not sharply, but with the slow deliberateness of a woman who was accustomed to other people revising their positions upon being looked at. Lucy? Her voice dropped half a register. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're a sensible woman. You've always been a sensible woman. There's no need to dig in out of pride. Lucy held her gaze. I'm not digging in out of pride, Diane. Then what would you call it? Staying in my home until I decide to leave it. The refrigerator kept humming. Diane refolded her napkin once precisely along the same crease and said nothing more about it that evening. 2 days later, Vanessa stopped her in the hallway. She was carrying a small basket of toiletries, moving them, Lucy noted, from the guest bathroom to the master bathroom. She stopped when she saw Lucy and tilted her head with that same curious, unguarded expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Lucy waited. "When are you planning to leave like, actually?" Not unkind, genuinely curious. The question of a woman who believed the answer was simply a logistical matter, a date to be confirmed and calendared. Lucy looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that Vanessa's smile shifted slightly, became something less certain. "When I'm ready," Lucy said. She walked past her to the end of the hall and into the small room that had once been her mother's, the room her mother had stayed in during the last winter of her illness, when the stairs to the guest room had become too much. Lucy had kept it exactly as it was. The same quilt, the same reading lamp with the slightly bent shade, the same stack of large print novels on the nightstand that her mother had never quite finished. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed. In the drawer of the nightstand beneath the novels was a manila envelope. Inside it, a copy of the prenuptial agreement dated June 2019. A copy of the IP registration for Meridian Nexus dated March 2018. A copy of the shareholder agreement, her name typed cleanly across the top, Lucy Adaze Mills, co-founder, 51% equity interest. She had not put them there recently. She had put them there 2 years ago, not out of fear, not out of suspicion, but out of the same quiet pragmatism that had always governed her. Her mother had known they were there. Her mother had been the kind of woman who believed that a daughter should always know where her papers were. She called Patricia that night, sitting cross-legged on her mother's bed, with the lamp throwing a warm circle of light across the quilt. "They're pushing," Lucy said. "Diane gave me a 6-week timeline tonight. Cole brought the woman into the house." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "So then, are they aware of the Meridian closing?" "No." "And you haven't said anything?" "No." A pause. The sound of Patricia setting something down on a hard surface. Then low and steady, "Don't tell them yet." 3 words. Simple. Absolute. Lucy lay back against her mother's pillow and looked at the ceiling. "Don't tell them yet." She held those words the way you hold something small and solid in your fist on a cold night, not squeezing, just feeling the weight of it, the warmth of having exactly one person in your corner who knew everything, who was not afraid, and who had a plan. Vanessa had carried her toiletries into the master bathroom. She didn't know she was standing in a house that Lucy could buy 17 times over. Patricia Wells did not believe in intuition. She believed in documents. She had been a family law and asset protection attorney for 26 years, and in that time she had learned that the truth of a marriage, its real architecture, the load-bearing walls and the rot behind the drywall, was almost never found in what people said to each other. It was found in bank statements, in loan applications, in the small initialed boxes at the bottom of pages that people signed without reading, because they were in a hurry or because they were trusting, or because they had decided at some level beneath conscious thought that they did not want to know. Patricia had started pulling Cole Whitfield's financial records the morning after Lucy called her from her mother's room. By Thursday afternoon, she knew. She called Lucy at 4:30 and asked her to come to the office. Not over the phone, in person. Lucy arrived in the same black coat she had worn to the funeral. She sat across from Patricia's desk, hands folded in her lap, and listened without interrupting, a quality Patricia had always appreciated about her, this capacity for stillness in the presence of information that would have caused most people to stand up and pace. The first thing Patricia laid on the desk was a bank document. A loan agreement dated 14 months ago from a private equity lending firm. $3,200,000. Collateral listed as joint marital assets. Co-signatory Lucy Adaze Mills. Lucy looked at the signature line for a long time. That was not her signature. She knew her own signature the way you know your own reflection, not because you study it, but because it is simply fundamentally yours. The loop of the L, the way the M collapsed slightly to the left. Whatever was on that line had the general shape of her name, the way a forgery always had the general shape, but it was not hers. It was a performance of her name by someone who had looked at it enough times to approximate it, but not enough times to become it. She looked up at Patricia. "He forged it," she said, not a question. "Yes," Patricia said. Lucy looked back at the document. "And the money." Patricia set a second sheet beside the first. A series of wire transfers over 11 months' portions flowing into what appeared to be a real estate development venture, a company Cole had quietly invested in with 2 of his fraternity contacts. The venture had collapsed 8 months ago. The money was gone. He's been servicing the minimum payments, Patricia said. Barely. The lender is already sending notices. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Does he think splitting my assets will cover this? Patricia looked at her steadily. He doesn't know what your assets are, Lucy. He thinks Meridian Nexus is a modest software company, probably worth a few million at best. He thinks he's divorcing a woman with a co-founder stake in a small tech startup and a savings account. Something passed across Lucy's face. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a person watching the last piece of a very long puzzle click into its place. What does the divorce filing actually say? Lucy asked. About Meridian. Patricia opened the folder on her left and removed a single page, the relevant section of Cole's filing, his attorney's language. She slid it across the desk without comment. Lucy read it. Read it again. Cole's legal team had listed Meridian Nexus under jointly accumulated marital assets, claiming that Lucy's involvement in the company had been funded by household income during the marriage, and that therefore her equity stake fell within the scope of marital property subject to division. It was bold. She would give them that. It was the kind of argument that required a specific kind of confidence, the confidence of a man who believed the other person in the room had less information than he did. She set the page down, picked up her pen, the small silver one she kept in her coat pocket, the one her mother had given her years ago engraved with her initials, and drew a single clean line beneath the paragraph. No annotation, no exclamation, just a line, a marking. What do we do with the forgery? She asked. We hold it, Patricia said. For now, it goes in the file. If this proceeds to litigation, and it will, we present it at the right moment. A forged co-signature on a loan application is a criminal matter, Lucy. That is not a divorce negotiation chip. That is a referral to the DA's office. Lucy nodded slowly. And the prenup, airtight, I drafted it myself. Patricia almost smiled. 17 pages. Every asset created before the marriage date is explicitly excluded from marital property. Meridian Nexus IP registration, March 2018. Your marriage, August 2019. There is a 16-month gap between the creation of that company and the creation of that marriage. No judge in this state is going to call that a joint asset. Lucy sat with that for a moment. Outside Patricia's window, the city was doing what cities did at 4:30, moving indifferent, full of its own concerns. She thought about the envelope, still in her coat pocket. She had not opened it again since the cemetery. She had not needed to. She thought about Cole standing at her mother's grave with that white envelope in his hand, already calculating. Already certain he was the one who knew more. She thought about her mother's voice, low and dry, and certain the voice she used when she was not asking a question, but delivering a conclusion. Maybe the quietest person in the room is usually the one who's already finished thinking. Lucy folded the loan document back into its crease, set it on Patricia's desk, stood up. What do you need from me? She said. Patricia picked up her pen. Sign the authorization form so I can file our response. Then go home, eat something, sleep if you can. A pause. And Lucy, don't change anything. Don't move anything. Don't give them a single thing to point to. Lucy buttoned her coat. He forged her name, she thought, walking down the corridor toward the elevator. On a loan he was drowning in, and now he wanted half of everything she'd built. The audacity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. The measuring tape appeared on a Saturday morning. Lucy heard it before she saw it, the small metallic snap of it, retracting twice from somewhere down the hall. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her coffee and listened. Another snap. Then Vanessa's voice, low and instructional, talking to someone on the phone. I'm thinking we take out the built-in shelves, the whole wall. Open it up completely. It'll photograph so much better that way. Lucy took a sip of her coffee. The built-in shelves had taken Cole's father 3 weekends to install, back when this was still a young couple's home and Cole had cared about things like that. Lucy had filled them slowly over the years, books, a few framed photographs, a small clay bowl her mother had made in a ceramics class she took at 61 because she had always wanted to try. The bowl was uneven. Lopsided on one side, the glaze pooling thick at the base. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful thing on the shelf. She finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, went back to her room. By mid-morning, Diane had arrived. She came the way she always came, without calling ahead, with the implicit understanding that her presence required no announcement. Lucy heard the front door, heard Cole's voice lift in greeting, heard Diane's heels on the hardwood moving from room to room with the systematic thoroughness of an inspector. Lucy stayed at her desk working through a stack of documents Patricia had sent over. Responses to review, timelines to confirm. The quiet administrative machinery of a legal process that Cole's side had set in motion and clearly had not thought through. 20 minutes later, a knock at her door. She did not look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading, placed her pen across the page, and then looked up. Diane stood in the doorway. Behind her, Vanessa hovered at a slight distance, close enough to observe, far enough to maintain plausible remove. "We'd like to take a look at this room," Diane said. Her voice had the particular texture of someone who had decided in advance that the answer would be yes and was simply fulfilling the formality of asking. "Vanessa is thinking about how to use the space." Lucy looked at Diane, then at Vanessa, then back at the desk in front of her covered in legal documents she had not turned face down. "I'm working," Lucy said. Diane's eyes moved across the room with the brief proprietary sweep of someone taking inventory. "It won't take long." "When I'm done working," Lucy said, "I'll let you know." A pause. Diane's chin lifted a small, almost imperceptible movement, the recalibration of a woman who had expected a different response and was deciding how to reclassify it. She looked at Lucy the way she sometimes looked at things she found inconvenient, not with anger exactly, but with the mild, impatient expression of someone waiting for an obstacle to recognize that it was an obstacle. She turned and left. Vanessa followed, pulling the door not quite shut behind her. That afternoon, Lucy heard them in the master bedroom. She was passing in the hallway on her way to the kitchen unhurried, taking the long route because she had learned in recent weeks that moving through this house slowly and without apology was itself a form of answer, and through the half-open door she caught a fragment of it. Diane's voice, "The whole layout will work better once she's gone. We can open up the closet into this wall here. Vanessa, do you think she'll actually leave?" "She doesn't seem like Diane." "She'll leave. Women like Lucy always leave when they understand that staying is beneath them." A pause, the sound of footsteps crossing toward the window. "She's sensible. She'll see reason eventually." Lucy stood in the hallway for a moment. Women like Lucy. She had been hearing that phrase in various forms for 5 years. Women like Lucy are practical. Women like Lucy don't make scenes. Women like Lucy understand their limitations. It was meant to be a kind of taxonomy, a label that organized her into a predictable category, assigned her a predictable set of behaviors, and made her easy to plan around. The thing about being underestimated so completely for so long by people who considered themselves perceptive, the thing nobody talked about was that it stopped feeling like an insult after a while. It started feeling like cover. She walked to the kitchen, made herself a sandwich, ate it standing at the counter looking out the window at the small backyard, the patch of dirt along the fence where her mother used to sit in a folding chair when she visited, turning her face up to whatever sun was available. She thought about what Diane had said. She'll leave when she understands that staying is beneath her. An interesting way to put it. That evening she gathered a few things and drove to her mother's house. The key still felt the same in the lock, the same slight resistance before the tumblers gave the same low creak of the door swinging in. The house smelled of her mother still faintly. Something floral and warm, like the lotion she had used for 30 years, embedded now in the walls and the curtains and the fabric of the couch. Lucy sat in her mother's chair. Not her own chair, her mother's. The one by the window with the worn armrests and the view of the neighbor's magnolia tree. She called Patricia. "Diane brought Vanessa to look at rooms today," she said. "They were planning which walls to tear out." Patricia made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. "Let them plan." "I know. They're planning a house they don't own and a divorce they haven't won against a woman they've never once taken seriously." A pause. "Let them plan all they want." Lucy looked at the magnolia tree through the window. The last of its blooms were going, petals loosening and falling in the early evening air, slow and unbothered. "Patricia," she said, "yes. How many times could I buy that house, the one they're redecorating?" A beat of silence. Then Patricia, dry and precise as she always was. "At the closing price. Somewhere between 16 and 18 times, depending on transaction costs." Lucy was quiet for a long moment. Vanessa had walked through every room like she already owned it. She didn't know she was standing in a house that Lucy could buy 17 times over. The response filing ran to 41 pages. Patricia had spent the better part of 2 weeks assembling it, not hurriedly, not with the compressed urgency of someone reacting, but with the methodical patience of someone who had been thinking 3 moves ahead since the night of the funeral. Every exhibit was tabbed. Every reference was cross-cited. The prenuptial agreement appeared as Exhibit A, all 17 pages of it, followed by the IP registration as Exhibit B, the original Meridian Nexus shareholder agreement, as Exhibit C, and a forensic accounting summary, prepared by a specialist Patricia had used for 11 years, that traced the precise origin of every dollar Lucy had ever invested in the company, all of it predating the marriage by a minimum of 14 months. Cole's legal team had filed a 40-page claim. Patricia had filed 41, one page longer, deliberately, the kind of detail that meant nothing logistically and everything psychologically. She called Lucy on a Wednesday morning to walk her through it. Lucy sat at the small desk in her mother's back room. She had been spending more nights here than at the house and had quietly begun thinking of it as returning rather than retreating, which felt important with a cup of tea going cold beside her and the morning light coming in, flat and gray through the curtains. Their central argument, Patricia said, is that your equity in Meridian Nexus was sustained and grown during the marriage using marital resources, specifically household income, that you drew from jointly. They're going to argue that without Cole's income stabilizing the household, you couldn't have maintained your involvement in the company. Lucy was quiet for a moment. That's the argument. That's the argument. Cole spent his income on a failed real estate venture he forged my signature to finance. Yes, Patricia said. I'm aware of the irony. What do we do with it? We don't lead with it. Patricia's voice was measured, almost conversational, the tone she used when she was most certain. We let their argument land. We let them present the theory that you were financially dependent on Cole's earnings. And then we introduce Exhibit A through C, and we watch their theory collapse under the weight of 16 months of documented evidence that predates your marriage entirely. A pause. The forgery we hold. We hold it until the moment it causes the most damage, which is not now. Lucy understood. You did not use your best card to win a hand. You used it to end the game. It was Marcus Webb who called first 3 days after the filing. Patricia had reached out to him quietly through back channels, a message relayed through the company's general counsel, carefully worded flagging only that Lucy's legal team might require a statement of record regarding her founding role at Meridian Nexus. She had not mentioned the divorce. She had not mentioned Cole. Marcus had called Patricia directly within the hour. Lucy was in the room when Patricia took the call, sitting in the chair across the desk, and she watched Patricia's face as she listened, that particular quality of stillness Patricia had when the conversation was going the way she needed it to go. He wants to help, Patricia said after she hung up. She said it simply without elaboration, as if it were never really in doubt. It hadn't been. Lucy knew Marcus. He was not a complicated man in the ways that mattered. He believed in accuracy, in the record being correct, in things being what they were, and being documented as such. The idea that a court of law might assign Lucy's life's work to a man who had called it a hobby would have offended him on a level that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with his fundamental orientation toward facts. He had said yes before Patricia finished explaining the situation. 4 days later, Cole came to Patricia's office alone. He did not bring his attorney. That was the first thing Patricia noted when her assistant relayed the request. Mr. Whitfield is asking if he can come by Thursday afternoon just to talk. Patricia had said yes immediately before Lucy even knew about it, and had set the recording application running on her phone before he walked through the door. Cole arrived in his charcoal suit, freshly pressed. He sat down across from Patricia and looked around the office with the slightly appraising expression of a man calibrating the territory. He opened with pleasantries. Patricia let him. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and lowered his voice as if the room might be listening, which of course it was. I think we can work this out between us, he said, without making it uglier than it needs to be. Lucy's a reasonable woman. I think she knows this is the best path forward for everyone. Patricia looked at him. What are you proposing, Cole? He shifted slightly in his chair. If Lucy's willing to sign over 30% of her Meridian stake as part of the settlement voluntarily outside of the court process, I'm willing to drop the contested proceedings. Clean break, no trial, everyone moves on. Patricia let the silence sit for a moment, long enough to be noticeable. I'll relay that to my client, she said. He nodded visibly, relaxing the particular relaxation of a man who believes he has just successfully negotiated. He stood, buttoned his jacket, extended his hand. Patricia shook it. She walked him to the door, closed it behind him, stood in the corridor for a moment looking at nothing in particular. Then she walked back to her desk, picked up her phone, stopped the recording, and sent the file to her secure server. After that, she called Lucy. He came in and asked for 30% of Meridian in exchange for dropping the contested filing, she said. Lucy was quiet on the other end. I recorded it, Patricia said. Another silence. Then Lucy very quietly, is that admissible? In this state, one-party consent. Yes. Patricia sat down. He just handed us obstruction of legal proceedings and an unauthorized settlement approach that directly contradicts his filed position. A pause. Cole had walked into a courtroom thinking he was the one holding the cards. I've been counting them since the night of the funeral. On the other end of the line, Lucy exhaled a long, slow breath, the kind that carries something heavy out with it. For the first time in weeks that night, she slept without waking. Marcus Webb had a habit of arriving early. Not conspicuously early, not the kind of early that announced itself and required acknowledgement, but quietly, practically early. The kind of early that meant the coffee was already made when you got there, the documents already organized on the table, the chair already pulled out. Lucy had noticed it in the first month they worked together 6 years ago and had filed it under the category of things she trusted about him. He was a man who prepared, who did not leave the first 5 minutes of anything to chance. He was already seated when Lucy arrived at Patricia's office that Thursday morning. Coffee in hand, a slim folder on the table in front of him, his glasses pushed up on his head the way he did when he had been reading for a while and needed a break from them. He stood when she walked in. Not with ceremony, just stood the way you stand for someone you respect. Lucy, he said. Marcus. She sat across from him. Thank you for coming. He waved it off a single small motion. Don't thank me. What's in that filing is wrong. The record should be correct. He tapped the folder in front of him. I've prepared a sworn statement. Founding date, equity structure, your IP contributions, the registration timeline, everything documented and sourced. He paused. I want you to know I went back and forth on this. Not because of any loyalty to Cole, I don't have any, but because I wasn't sure how it might land for the company for our remaining stakeholders. Lucy looked at him steadily. And then I read what his attorneys filed. He said, the part where they called your work a marital asset, the part where they described your founding contribution as, he opened the folder, found the line, read it flat and precise, auxiliary intellectual support provided within the context of the marital household. He closed the folder. And I stopped going back and forth. Patricia, at the head of the table, made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been satisfaction. Possibly both. 3 days after Marcus's visit, Cole's attorney called Patricia with a revised position. They were withdrawing the auxiliary intellectual support language, replacing it with a softer formulation, something about collaborative development environment. Patricia listened to the revision, said she would review it, hung up, and sent Lucy a text that said only, they're nervous. Good. Lucy read the text standing in the produce section of a grocery store, a bag of apples in one hand, and felt something loosen incrementally in her chest, the way tension releases not all at once but in layers, each layer revealing another beneath it, until eventually you reach something that might be the floor. She bought the apples, bought other things. Drove back to her mother's house and cooked a real meal for the first time in weeks. Nothing elaborate, just rice and stew, the recipe her mother had written, on an index card that was still taped to the inside of the cabinet door in handwriting that slanted slightly to the right. She ate at the kitchen table, by herself, slowly. It was the best meal she had eaten in 2 months. The call from Diane came on a Friday evening. Lucy was sitting on the back step of her mother's house watching the neighbor's cat move along the top of the fence with the fluid, unhurried confidence of an animal that had never once doubted its right to be exactly where it was. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Diane Whitfield. She considered it for a moment, then she pressed accept, set the phone on the step beside her, and let it sit on speaker while she watched the cat. Lucy. Diane's voice came through with the particular quality it had when she was being deliberate, each word placed down carefully like furniture being arranged. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot with all of this. I think there's been some miscommunication. Lucy did not respond. The cat paused at the end of the fence, looked at something in the neighbor's yard, decided against it, and turned back. I want you to know, Diane continued, that this doesn't have to be adversarial. Cole is willing to be fair. He's always been willing to be fair. But this process, the lawyers, the filing, all of it, it's getting expensive and it's getting messy. And I think if you and I could just speak plainly with each other, woman to woman, Diane. Lucy's voice was even. What is it you want to say? A pause. The repositioning of an argument. Just give him what he wants, Diane said, and disappear quietly. That's what women like you do. You're smart enough to know when a situation has run its course. You take what's offered, you move on, and you build something new somewhere else. Her voice dropped, becoming almost gentle, the gentleness of a blade held flat. There's no shame in it, Lucy. Knowing when to walk away gracefully, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. The cat had stopped again this time, looking directly at Lucy across the darkening yard, amber eyes perfectly still. Lucy reached over, without looking at the phone, without changing her expression, without making any sound that might interrupt the recording because the phone had been recording since the second ring, a habit Patricia had suggested and Lucy had adopted without discussion. She pressed her thumb gently on the screen to confirm the levels were running. They were. She watched the cat. Diane kept talking for another 40 seconds or so, circling back through variations of the same territory. Sensible woman, graceful exit, no need to drag this out, and Lucy let her finish. Let every word land on the microphone clean and uninterrupted. When Diane finally went quiet, Lucy said, "I'll think about it." "Good." Diane's voice relaxed. "That's all I'm asking." "Good night, Diane." She ended the call. Sat for another minute in the cooling evening air. The cat had moved on. She picked up the phone, opened Patricia's contact, typed "Diane called," recorded. "I'll send it tonight." Patricia's response came back in under a minute. "Perfect. Get some rest." Lucy set the phone down on the step beside her. Diane Whitfield had been giving orders her entire life and being obeyed. She had not noticed the phone on the step beside Lucy. She never did. She never once thought to ask whether the quiet woman on the other end of the line was listening or recording. She had made that mistake before, in kitchens, at dinner tables, in hallways, outside rooms she thought were empty. She had been making it, Lucy realized, for 5 years. The courthouse was gray and tall and entirely indifferent to the lives being sorted inside it. Lucy had passed it hundreds of times over the years, on the way to somewhere else in taxis, once on foot during a lunch break years ago, when she had walked farther than she intended, and looked up to find it simply there, its stone facade the same temperature as the winter sky behind it. She had never thought much about it then. It was a building, a function. It processed things. She thought about that now, standing on the sidewalk outside it at 8:41 in the morning, her breath making small clouds in the cold air, her coat buttoned to the top. Patricia appeared beside her, navy blazer, gold-rimmed glasses, a document case under one arm. She looked at Lucy the way she sometimes did before something important, a brief, complete assessment checking that everything was in order, and then gave a single nod. "Ready?" she said. Lucy looked at the building. Yes. They went in. The courtroom was smaller than Lucy had imagined. She wasn't sure what she had imagined exactly, something more theatrical, perhaps more commensurate with the weight of what was being decided, but it was just a room. Wood paneling, fluorescent light supplemented by 2 high windows, a gallery of benches bolted to the floor, a raised platform at the front, where the judge's bench sat, with the unhurried authority of furniture that had witnessed a great many things, and been moved by none of them. Lucy sat at the left table with Patricia. Cole sat at the right table with his attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who wore his suit slightly too large and had the compressed, spring-loaded energy of someone who believed volume was a form of argument. He was shuffling papers when Lucy and Patricia walked in. He did not look up. Cole did. He was wearing his best suit. She recognized it, charcoal gray fine wool, the one he wore to the Whitfield family Christmas dinner every year, because his mother said it photographed well. He had his hands flat on the table in front of him, and when he saw Lucy, he held her gaze for precisely 2 seconds before looking away. Not with guilt. With the particular careful blankness of a man who has been coached to show nothing. In the gallery behind him, Diane, third row center, tweed blazer, pearl earrings, her silver hair pressed flat. Beside her, Vanessa in a camel coat that was slightly too formal for the occasion, her golden highlighted hair pulled back. They had come together. That told Lucy something, though she was not sure yet exactly what. She did not look at them again. She opened her folder, aligned her pen beside it, and waited. Gerald Fitch opened for Cole's side with 40 minutes that were in structure fairly competent and in substance deeply confused. He spoke about the nature of marital partnership, about the way a household functions as an integrated financial unit, about how the stability of shared domestic life creates the conditions under which individual enterprise becomes possible, and how the law in its wisdom recognizes this interdependence. He used the phrase jointly cultivated environment 11 times. Lucy counted. He spoke about meridian nexus as something that had grown inside the marriage the way plants grew in a greenhouse, dependent on the controlled conditions around them, inseparable from the structure that housed them. It was a reasonable argument. If you did not know the dates, it was almost convincing. Patricia let him finish. She did not interrupt, did not shift in her seat, did not make the small sounds of disagreement that less disciplined attorneys sometimes made. She sat with her hands folded on the table and listened with the placid, attentive expression of a woman hearing something she had already answered. When it was her turn, she stood. She did not begin with argument. She began with a document. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to submit Exhibit A into evidence." The prenuptial agreement, all 17 pages, was entered into the record. She let the judge read the relevant section, watched him read it, watched the moment his eyes moved from the page to Cole's table and then back to the page. Then she submitted Exhibit B, the IP registration for Meridian Nexus, dated the 14th of March, 2018. Lucy Adays Mills, sole registrant. Technology classification, full description of the platform architecture, the original filing number, the federal confirmation stamp. The intellectual property at the foundation of Meridian Nexus Group, Patricia said, was created, developed, and registered by my client 16 months before her marriage to Mr. Whitfield. Under the terms of the prenuptial agreement both parties signed in June of 2019, all assets created prior to the marriage remain the exclusive property of their creator. She paused, not for effect, simply because the next sentence deserved its own space. There is no jointly cultivated environment here, Your Honor. There is a woman who built something and a man who married her afterward. Gerald Fitch wrote something on his notepad. Whatever it was, he wrote it hard. Patricia requested the floor to call a witness. The judge granted it. She said the name Marcus Webb. Lucy did not turn around to watch him enter. She felt rather than saw the shift in the room, a slight change in the quality of the air, the way attention moves when something unexpected walks through a door. She heard Cole's chair shift slightly against the floor, heard Gerald Fitch lean over and say something low and urgent. Heard Cole's response 2 words too quiet to make out. She kept her eyes forward. Marcus took the stand with the same unhurried quality he brought to everything. He stated his name, his title, Chief Financial Officer, Meridian Nexus Group, his tenure at the company, and his relationship to its founding. Patricia asked him to describe for the record the founding structure of Meridian Nexus. He described it precisely, without elaboration or drama, the way a man describes something he has known for a long time and sees no reason to dress up two co-founders. Equity split of 51 to 49%, the majority stake held by Lucy Adays Mills from the date of incorporation March 2018. Patricia asked him whether Lucy's founding role had been established before or after her marriage to Cole Whitfield. Before, Marcus said, by more than a year. Patricia asked him whether at any point during the marriage Cole Whitfield had made financial contributions to Meridian Nexus that might constitute a claim to equity. Marcus looked across the courtroom with the expression of a man answering a question that has a very clear answer. "No," he said. "None." Patricia thanked him and sat down. Gerald Fitch cross-examined for 12 minutes. He achieved nothing. The judge called a brief recess. In the hallway, Patricia found Lucy standing by the window at the end of the corridor looking out at the street below. "How are you?" Patricia asked. "Fine," Lucy said. And then, because it was true, better than fine. Patricia looked at her for a moment. "When we go back in, I'm going to ask the court to confirm the valuation of the acquisition for the record, the full number." She paused. It will be the first time it's said aloud in that room. Lucy turned from the window. She thought about Cole at the graveside, holding out the white envelope with the slightly unsealed corner, certain and unhurried, already running the numbers on a woman he had never once truly looked at. She thought about Vanessa measuring the walls. She thought about Diane on the back step, her voice going gentle at the edges. "That's what women like you do." She straightened the collar of her coat. "Say it clearly," she said. Patricia almost smiled. "I intend to." They walked back toward the courtroom doors together, and Marcus Webb, coming from the other direction, fell into step beside them without a word. Simply there, as he had always been, quiet and certain and exactly on time. Cole's jaw was tight when they walked back in. He had been told something during the recess. Whatever it was, it had not helped. Lucy sat down, opened her folder, aligned her pen. The doors swung shut behind them. The judge settled back into his chair with the particular stillness of a man who had presided over enough proceedings to know when a room was about to change. He had been on the bench for 19 years. His name was the Honorable Bernard Okafor, a compact, careful man in his early 60s, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses he wore low on his nose when he was reviewing documents and pushed up when he was listening. He had reviewed Patricia's exhibits during the recess with the thoroughness of someone who intended to get this right, and when he returned to the bench, he had the look of a man who already knew where the evidence pointed and was waiting for the record to confirm it formally. The courtroom resettled. Papers rustled. Fitch whispered something to Cole, who was staring at the table in front of him with the fixed, slightly glassy expression of a man running calculations that were not working out. Patricia rose. Your Honor, she said, with the court's permission, I'd like to enter one final exhibit into the record before we address the matter of asset valuation. Judge Okafor nodded. Proceed. She submitted Exhibit D, the shareholder agreement original, and notarized dated March 2018. Lucy Adays Mills, co-founder, 51% equity interest. Every page initialed, every clause intact. Then, Exhibit E, the forensic accounting summary, prepared by Patricia's specialist over 3 weeks, tracing the capitalization history of Meridian Nexus from its founding through the date of the acquisition. Every dollar of Lucy's investment mapped to its source, personal savings accumulated before the marriage, a small inheritance from her maternal grandmother, a private angel investment facilitated through Marcus's network. Not $1 originating from joint marital funds, not 1 cent. Gerald Fitch objected to the forensic summary on procedural grounds. The judge overruled him in 4 words. Then Patricia said, Your Honor, I'd like to address the matter of the acquisition valuation for the purpose of establishing the full scope of assets at issue and to correct the characterization offered in Mr. Whitfield's original filing. She reached into her document case and removed the final exhibit, the acquisition agreement, the executed version, 112 pages, bound in a black cover with the Meridian Nexus logo at the top. She approached the bench, handed it to the clerk, and returned to her position. The acquisition of Meridian Nexus Group, she said, was completed and signed on the morning of February the 9th of this year. A pause. She let that date register, February the 9th, the morning of the funeral, the morning Cole had put on his best black suit to go stand beside a woman he was already planning to leave. The total transaction value as documented in the executed agreement, now before the court, is $750 million. She said the number the way you say something true, without performance, without inflation, simply $750 million, flat and enormous and entirely devastatingly real. The room did not gasp. It was not that kind of room. But something happened in it, a collective involuntary recalibration, like the moment when the scale of something becomes suddenly apparent and the brain scrambles to adjust. Lucy felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure, not heard, not seen, just felt. She did not look at Cole. She looked at the judge. Judge Okafor had pushed his glasses up. He was looking at Patricia and then at the document and then at the number on the page before him with the expression of a man confirming something he had already begun to suspect. He wrote something on his notepad. 3 or 4 words unhurried. Patricia sat down. The silence stretched for 4 full seconds. Then, from behind her, from the gallery, Lucy heard it. A sound. Small. Involuntary. The sound of air leaving a body too quickly, the specific register of shock that bypasses composure, entirely and simply escapes. She heard the creak of a bench. Movement. Later, Patricia would describe it to her in detail. Lucy had been facing forward the entire time, had not turned once, but she would carry Patricia's account of it with her afterward. Clear and complete, Vanessa had stood up. Not dramatically, not with words. She had simply stood, gathered her camel coat around her with both arms crossed over her chest, like a woman who has just walked into unexpected cold and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. The door swung shut behind her with a sound that was quieter than it should have been given everything. Diane had not moved. She was looking at her hands in her lap. The pearl earrings caught the light from the high windows, 2 small points of brightness against the dark fabric of her blazer. Her mouth was pressed into a line so thin it had almost disappeared. And Cole. Cole had turned his head slightly when Vanessa stood, a reflexive movement, the instinct of a man tracking something leaving. And then he had turned back, and he sat very still with his hands flat on the table, exactly as they had been at the start of the morning, but the stillness had a different quality now. Before, it had been the stillness of composure. Now it was the stillness of a man who has stopped moving because he no longer knows which direction to move in. His mouth had opened once, briefly, closed again. No sound had come out. Gerald Fitch was writing on his notepad with the energy of a man trying to look occupied. Judge Okafor removed his glasses entirely, set them on the bench, looked at Cole's table for a long moment. "Mr. Fitch," he said. His voice was even calibrated. The voice of a man who had decided something and was now explaining it. "I've reviewed the prenuptial agreement, the IP registration, the founding documentation, and the forensic accounting summary. I've heard testimony from Mr. Webb. I've now reviewed the acquisition agreement." He paused. "The position advanced in your client's filing that the equity held by Ms. Mills in Meridian Nexus Group constitutes a jointly accumulated marital asset is not supported by the evidence before this court. It is not supported by the timeline. It is not supported by the financial record. and it is directly contradicted by the prenuptial agreement your client signed in June of 2019. Fitch started to speak. The judge continued. Furthermore, Judge Okafor said, the court notes with concern the discrepancy between the characterization in Mr. Whitfield's filing and the documented record of Ms. Mills's founding role. The court will be requesting supplemental briefing on whether the representations made in that filing meet the threshold for sanctions under Rule 11. Fitch's pen stopped moving. Cole looked at his attorney. Something passed between them, quick, compressed, and then Cole looked away. Patricia had one more thing. She stood again quietly and asked the court's permission to introduce evidence relevant to a separate and related matter. The judge granted it. She submitted 2 items. The first was the loan agreement, the $3 million document with the forged signature on the co-signatory line. The second was a forensic handwriting analysis conducted by an independent examiner, concluding with a confidence level of 94% that the signature attributed to Lucy Adays Mills had not been produced by Lucy Adays Mills. She did not editorialize. She did not name what it was. She submitted it and sat down and let the document be what it was. Judge Okafor looked at it for a long time. The court, he said finally, will be referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. He set the document down. We'll recess until 2 o'clock. The gavel came down. Lucy sat for a moment after the room began to move around her. She heard Fitch's voice urgent and low from the table to her right. Heard Cole respond one syllable, then nothing. Heard the gallery behind her begin to empty the shuffle of coats and footsteps, the low current of voices that always followed a verdict. She did not move yet. She looked at the window above the judge's bench, one of the 2 high windows that let in the flat winter light. The sky outside was the pale, washed-out gray of a day that had not decided yet what it wanted to be. A pigeon landed on the ledge, looked in for a moment with one bright eye, and then was gone. Patricia put a hand briefly on her arm. Just briefly. Then removed it. Lucy looked down at the folder in front of her, the pen beside it. The single sheet of paper on top her own notes from this morning, written in her own hand, the L looping exactly as it always had, the M collapsing slightly to the left. Her signature. Hers. She thought about the number hanging in the air of the courtroom, 750 million said once, clearly, and then absorbed into the record where it would remain. Not hers to perform or announce, simply hers. The number Cole had never thought to look for. The number that had been there all along. He had served divorce papers to the wrong woman. He just hadn't known it until now. The 2 o'clock session lasted 19 minutes. Patricia had told Lucy this was possible, that once the morning's evidence landed the way it did, the afternoon might be brief. Not because justice moved quickly, but because there was simply nothing left to argue. The architecture of Cole's case had not been damaged. It had been dissolved. What remained was procedural, the court confirming what the record already showed. Language being entered, signatures being requested, the machinery of conclusion doing what it did. Judge Okafor returned to the bench at 2:03. He had the look of a man who had eaten lunch quickly and thought through the remaining matter with the same efficiency. He settled his glasses, looked at both tables. He spoke for 11 minutes. The prenuptial agreement was valid and enforceable. The equity held by Lucy Adays Mills in Meridian Nexus Group predated the marriage by 16 months and was explicitly protected under the terms of the agreement signed by both parties. The forensic accounting summary confirmed no marital funds had been directed toward the company at any point. The founding documentation and IP registration were unambiguous. The court found no basis, legal, factual, or evidentiary, for Cole Whitfield's claim to any portion of Meridian Nexus Group or its acquisition proceeds. All such claims were dismissed. The gavel came down once. Clean and final, the way things end when they are simply over. Gerald Fitch wrote something on his notepad slowly, the way a man writes when he has nothing left to write but needs somewhere to put his hands. Cole sat very still. They were in the hallway when the secondary matter was addressed. Patricia had arranged it quietly ahead of time, a brief meeting in a side room with the court's administrative liaison and a representative from the district attorney's office who had reviewed the forgery referral that morning and had questions. Lucy was not required to be present for this part. Patricia handled it. Lucy stood in the hallway by the window at the end of the corridor, the same window she had stood at during the morning recess, looking down at the same street, and waited. The street below was doing its ordinary afternoon things. A delivery truck double-parked. A woman in a yellow coat walked a small dog that stopped every few feet to investigate something invisible. A group of men in hard hats stood at the corner eating from paper bags, talking unhurried. The world outside a courthouse never seemed to know what was happening inside it. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She did not turn immediately. She had learned in these past weeks the discipline of not turning at every sound of letting things approach at their own pace. But then she heard her name, and it was not Patricia's voice. It was Diane's. She was standing 10 feet away alone. Vanessa had not returned after the morning session, a fact Lucy had registered and filed without comment. Diane looked smaller than she usually did. Not physically, she was the same height, the same posture, the same tweed blazer with the pearl earrings catching the corridor light. But something in her had contracted. The particular largeness that came from certainty had left her, and without it she looked like a woman standing inside a coat that no longer fit quite right. "Lucy," she said again. Lucy looked at her. Diane opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I want you to know that I never—" She stopped. Started differently. "Cole made his own choices. I want to be clear about that. Whatever he decided to do, those were his decisions." Lucy studied her for a moment. The pearl earrings, the thin mouth, the eyes that were usually so precisely directed and were now for the first time in Lucy's experience of her slightly uncertain of where to land. "I know," Lucy said. Something shifted in Diane's face, a brief loosening as if she had expected resistance, and the absence of it left her without footing. Lucy turned back to the window. She heard Diane take a breath. Heard her begin to say something, "I just think if we could," and then Lucy walked. Not fast, not dramatically. She simply began moving down the corridor toward the elevator. Her coat buttoned her folder under her arm, her heels making the same sound they had made all morning on the same floor. Steady, unhurried, entirely her own. Diane called out her name once. Lucy kept walking. Some doors once closed do not open again. Not for please, not for sorry, not for anything. Patricia found her at the elevator. They rode down together in silence, the comfortable silence of two people who have been through something and do not need to narrate it back to each other immediately. The lobby was busy with the mid-afternoon traffic of a courthouse clerk's attorneys, people in their good clothes, clutching folders, everyone moving with the particular focused energy of people who have somewhere specific to be. Outside, the cold air came in sharp and immediate. Lucy stopped on the steps and looked up, a reflex, the way you look up when you step out of an enclosed space and remember that the sky exists. "The forgery referral," she said. "What happens now? The DA's office reviews the handwriting analysis and the loan documents," Patricia said. "They'll determine whether to pursue charges. Given the confidence level of the analysis and the dollar amount involved," she paused, "I would not bet against it." Lucy nodded slowly. "And the divorce itself, filed as uncontested from this point forward. His attorneys will have the revised paperwork to me by end of week." Patricia looked at her. "It's done, Lucy. The Meridian assets are protected. The prenup holds. Everything you built is exactly where it belongs." Lucy looked at the street. The delivery truck had gone. The woman in the yellow coat and her small dog had gone. The men in hard hats had gone. The corner was just a corner again. "Vanessa left during the morning session," Lucy said. "She didn't come back." "No," Patricia said. "She was after what she thought he had." "Yes." When she found out what he actually had, Lucy did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Patricia looked at her with the expression she sometimes had, a dry, precise kind of warmth. The warmth of a woman who had seen a great deal and had long ago decided that accuracy was the most useful form of compassion. "Vanessa Osei had packed her things and left the house before the afternoon session began," she said. "I received confirmation from the property manager at 2:47. Lucy absorbed this. She thought about the measuring tape, the snap and retraction of it in the hallway on a Saturday morning, the silk throw over the arm of her couch, the walls Vanessa had stood in front of, planning to open up the shelves she had planned to tear out, the lopsided clay bowl her mother had made in a ceramics class at 61. The bowl was still on the shelf. She had checked before she left that morning. She drove to her mother's house. Not to the house she had shared with Cole, she would deal with that in due course with the orderly efficiency she brought to everything. But to her mother's house, the small one with the key, that always stuck slightly before, giving the faint floral smell in the walls, the magnolia tree visible through the back window. She let herself in, stood in the entryway for a moment, just standing the way you stand in a place that knows you. Her phone buzzed. "Patricia, it's done, Lucy. All of it." She looked at the message for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and while she waited for it to boil, she stood at the window and looked out at the yard, the small patch of dirt along the fence where her mother had kept her folding chair, where she had sat on summer evenings with her face tilted up to whatever warmth was available, asking nothing, wanting nothing beyond that exact moment. The yard was bare now. Winter bare brown and still, but in 2 months, maybe less, things would begin again out there. They always did. The kettle began to sing. Spring came to her mother's yard on a Tuesday. Not officially, the calendar said there were still 3 weeks of winter remaining, and the morning air still had that particular edge to it, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your jaw, no matter how well you buttoned your coat. But something had shifted overnight. The light was different. It came in at a slightly different angle through the kitchen window, fell across the counter at a new slant, and the quality of it was warmer. Not warm, but warmer. The difference between a thing and the beginning of a thing. Lucy noticed it when she woke. She lay still for a moment in her mother's bed. She had been sleeping here most nights now, not out of sadness exactly, but out of something she could not name. Precisely some pull toward the room that felt less like grief and more like continuation, and looked at the light on the ceiling and listened to the house. It was quiet in the way old houses are quiet. Not empty quiet. Present quiet. The settling of wood, the low conversation of pipes, the particular stillness that belongs to a place that has held a great deal and is in no hurry to forget any of it. She got up, made coffee. She took it outside. The back step was cold through her socks. She had forgotten shoes again, a habit her mother had spent 20 years failing to correct, and she stood on it for a moment, adjusting to the temperature before sitting down. The mug was an old one, ceramic off-white with a small chip on the rim where it had knocked against the edge of the sink one too many times. Her mother had bought it years ago at a church flea market along with 6 others in the same mismatched, unchosen way her mother had always assembled things, not by design, but by accumulation piece by piece, each one carrying some small residue of where it had come from. Lucy curled her hands around it and looked at the yard. The dirt along the fence was still bare, still winter pale, but there was something at the edge of it, a small, insistent green, barely visible, pushing up through the surface along the fence line, where her mother had planted bulbs 3 autumns ago. They had not come up last year. Her mother had been too ill by spring to notice or to say if she noticed. But here they were now, small and definite and entirely unbothered by the cold. She looked at them for a long time. Her phone was on the step beside her. It had been quiet since last night, Patricia's message. It's done, Lucy. All of it, and then nothing further, the particular silence that follows completion. No more filings, no more strategy calls, no more documents to review in the small back room with her tea going cold. She thought about calling someone. Her aunt in Baltimore, maybe her mother's younger sister who had called twice since the funeral and left messages that Lucy had listened to, but not returned yet, not because she didn't want to, but because she had not known what to say while everything was still in motion. Now she did, later she thought. Later today? She drank her coffee. The neighbor's cat appeared on the fence, the same one she had watched on the evening of Diane's call, the amber-eyed one with the extravagant indifference of an animal that has never once been made to feel it did not belong exactly where it was. It walked the length of the fence without acknowledging her, paused at the far end, reconsidered something, and walked back. Then it sat, looked at her. She looked back. She thought about the courtroom, about the number 750 million said once cleanly into a room that did not know what to do with it. She thought about Cole's hands flat on the table, their stillness changing quality between morning and afternoon, the way a landscape looks different depending on whether the light is coming or going. She did not feel triumph. She had been waiting to feel it, had wondered in the months of preparation whether the moment of conclusion would carry that particular brightness, that vindication that people described as tasting like something. It didn't. What she felt was quieter than that, and she thought better. The feeling of a weight that has been distributed correctly at last. Everything in its right place, the record correct. Her name on her own work, her work belonging to itself, the thing she had built standing on its own foundation without anyone else's claim attached to it. That was enough. It was, she thought, more than enough. Patricia called at 9:30. Lucy heard the phone buzz on the step beside her, looked at the screen, and answered. "Good morning," Patricia said. Her voice had a different texture this morning, looser, something that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it, the register she used when the work was finished, and she could afford to be slightly more human about it. "Good morning," Lucy said. "How are you?" Lucy looked at the fence line. The small green things pushing up through the winter-pale dirt. The cat still sitting still looking at her with those amber eyes. "I'm good," she said. A pause. The comfortable kind. The revised divorce filing came through this morning. His attorneys moved faster than I expected. A brief sound that might have been satisfaction. Everything is exactly as it should be. The Meridian assets are clean. The prenup is recorded. The DA's office confirmed they've opened a formal review of the forgery. Another pause. It's done, Lucy. All of it. Lucy turned the mug in her hands. The chipped rim caught the morning light on one side, a small imperfection made briefly bright. Thank you, Patricia, she said. Your mother would have been— Patricia stopped. Started again more carefully. She knew, she always knew who you were. Her voice was quiet now, the quietest Lucy had heard it. She told me once years ago, she said, my Lucy doesn't make noise about things. She just makes sure they're done. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. The morning air pressed gently at the edges of her collar. The cat on the fence shifted its weight, tucked one paw under its chest. That sounds like her, Lucy said. It does, Patricia said. Take the day, Lucy. You've earned it. They said goodbye. Lucy set the phone down on the step beside her and sat with her coffee and the quiet yard and the cat and the small green things coming up through the dirt, unhurried, and certain doing exactly what they had always intended to do. She stayed on the step for a long time. She thought about her mother in this yard in the folding chair along the fence, face tilted toward whatever warmth was available. Not asking for more than what was there, not performing gratitude, just receiving at the sun, the morning, the ordinary given fact of being alive and outside and present in a moment. She thought about the tapping of her own keyboard in the small room years ago, the late-night sound of a sports recap bleeding under the door. Her feet cold because she kept forgetting socks, her mind entirely alive with something she was building in the dark while the world around her slept. She thought about the name on the registration. March 2018. Her name. Her loops and her slightly left collapsing M. Her. She reached down and pressed her palm flat against the cold step beside her, the painted wood slightly rough, slightly damp from the night. Felt the texture of it, the solidity, the particular patience of something that had been here a long time and planned to remain. The coffee in the mug had gone cool. She drank the last of it anyway. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself in courtrooms or boardrooms. It doesn't require an audience or a moment or a number read aloud into a silent room. It sits on a porch step with cold feet and a chipped mug and a yard that is just beginning again to come alive. It simply continues. The thing I keep coming back to from Lucy's story isn't the $750 million. It isn't the courtroom or the prenup or the moment Cole's hands stopped knowing where to go. It's the image of her in that small room years ago in a sweatshirt with cold feet building something in the dark while someone she trusted called it a hobby. She didn't argue. She didn't need him to see it. She just kept building. There's something in that. I think a lot of us recognize the experience of doing something real and serious and significant, while the people closest to us look right through it because they've already decided who you are and what you're capable of, and they're not interested in revising their conclusion. It's a particular kind of loneliness, and a particular kind of freedom if you learn to use it right. Lucy used it right. She didn't need Cole to believe in Meridian Nexus. She had Marcus. She had Patricia. She had her mother who put important papers in the nightstand and didn't make a speech about it, just made sure her daughter knew where they were. That's the part that stays with me. Not the victory, the preparation, the quiet, unglamorous years-long work of knowing exactly who you are and making sure the record reflects it long before anyone thinks to check. If this story spoke to something you've lived, something you've built, while someone nearby called it small, something you've protected while someone else tried to claim it, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign.